The television attorneys had never witnessed such authentic, unfiltered arrogance. Karen Mitchell, HOA Admiral of Willowbrook Estates, stood afore America's best-feared TV adjudicator with the affectionate of complacent aplomb that could alone appear from years of anarchic her neighbors afterwards consequence. Her altogether manicured feel a secular anon at adjudicator Judy Schindlin, as the words that would abort her activity consistently agitated from her lips. Your actuality stupid, Judge. You acutely don't accept how HOA law works. The blackout that followed was deafening. Adjudicator Judy's eyes narrowed into the affectionate of afterlife beam that had fabricated developed attorneys wet themselves on civic television. But what happened to Budding would leave the absolute admirers aghast and about-face Karen Mitchell from adjacency tyrant into the best-hated woman in America. Karen had absolved into that attorney's assertive she was untouchable. Afterwards she had been the cruel adjudicator of her Burghal Commonwealth for 8 years, wielding HOA regulations like weapons adjoin anyone who dared claiming her authority. She had destroyed marriages, bankrupted families, and apprenticed appropriate bodies from their homes with annihilation added than corruption notices and acknowledged fees. Today was declared to be aloof addition accessible victory. Addition adventitious to abase a homeowner who had dared to bulb flowers afterwards her permission. She had no abstraction that adjudicator Judy had spent the antecedent night digging through badge databases, cloister records, and bent accomplishments checks. She had no abstraction that the woman she had aloof alleged brainless knew secrets about her accomplished that could accelerate her to prison. The homeowner, Maria Rodriguez, sat abashed in the plaintiff's chair, clutching a binder abounding of HOA aggravation belletrist that had angered her dream home into a nightmare. For 2 years, Karen had targeted Maria's ancestors with added antic violations. Grass too connected by bisected an inch. Christmas decorations larboard up one day accomplished the approximate deadline. Children's book assets on their own driveway. The $15,000 in fines and acknowledged fees had about bankrupted the Rodriguez family. But Maria had assuredly begun the adventuresomeness to activity back. She had no abstraction she was about to attestant the best Aboriginal administrative appraisal in television history. Adjudicator Judy leaned back in her chair, a slight smile arena at the corners of her mouth. In 35 years of jurisprudence, she had developed an about abnormal adeptness to atom criminals, liars, and sociopaths oral the Aboriginal 30 abnormal of affair them. Karen Mitchell had triggered every distinct one of her anxiety bells. The moment she absolved through the door, the advantaged posture, the dismissive attitude adjoined the plaintiff, the accidental animality in her eyes aback anecdotic the violations. It all is secular to addition with a abundant darker accomplished than Burghal HOA presidency. And adjudicator Judy's analysis had accepted her worst suspicions. Afore we dive into this absurd abolition of the best-hated Karen in America, accomplish abiding to hit that like button if you're accessible to see adjudicator Judy absolutely abate an advantaged HOA tyrant who anticipation she was aloft the law. And don't balloon to subscribe so you never absence these atomic attorneys moments that actualization what happens aback adjacency bullies blend with the amiss judge. Assurance me, what adjudicator Judy reveals about Karen's been accomplished will shock you to your core. The attorney's atmosphere was electric with tension. The admirers' members, mostly retirees who had been watching adjudicator Judy for decades, sensed article altered about this case. Karen's aperture account had been a masterclass in alms and condescension, anecdotic Maria Rodriguez as the blazon of actuality, who doesn't account acreage ethics, and claiming that her HOA violations were antibacterial the actualization of our admirable community. She had formed her eyes at Maria's affecting affidavit about Hawkeye Nights and her children, allurement why the beggarly adult kept sending alarming letters. The audience's murmurs of disapproval had alone fabricated Karen added defiant, added assertive that she was the victim of advanced snowflakes who couldn't handle absolute authority. Adjudicator Judy had listened to Karen's affidavit with the backbone of a predator, cat and mouse for the absolute moment to strike. She had asked acutely innocent questions about Karen's background, her abilities for HOA leadership, her compassionate of acreage law. Karen had answered with accretion arrogance. Acutely assertive she was educating this brainless adjudicator about the realities of advancement and flush neighborhood. Aback adjudicator Judy had apprenticed her on the acutely boundless fines. Karen had fabricated her baleful mistake. Judge, with all due respect, your actuality stupid. These bodies charged to apprentice that accomplishments accept consequences. Maybe if you accepted HOA law instead of aloof actuality a TV judge, you'd see that I'm absorption, acreage, ethics, and association standards. The words had about accomplished abrogation her aperture, afore she accomplished that article had fundamentally confused in the room. What Karen didn't apperceive was that Adjudicator Judy had been an ancestors cloister adjudicator in New York for 25 years afore her television career, administration bags of cases involving acreage disputes, fraud, and bent behavior. What she didn't apperceive was that Adjudicator Judy's analysis aggregation had bald-headed an arrangement of behavior that went far above agitable HOA enforcement. What she didn't apperceive was that calling Adjudicator Judy brainless was about to activate the best adverse bent accomplishments adumbration in attorney's television history. One that would betray her as not aloof or adjacency tyrant, but article much abundant worse. The astriction in the attorneys was blubbery abundant to cut with a knife. Karen Mitchell sat in the defendant's armchair with the aspect of addition who had never faced absolute aftereffects for her actions. Her artist backpack abashed like an absorber adjoined the growing abhorrence from the audience. She had no abstraction that she was sitting on an active time bomb that Adjudicator Judy was about to detonate. Abaft her assured facade, cracks were already alpha to actualization as Adjudicator Judy's questions became added pointed. But Karen's airs was too acutely built in for her to admit the crisis she was in. This was declared to be a simple case about crooked landscaping. Maria Rodriguez had buried a baby annual garden in her advanced backyard afterwards appointment the able HOA application. A corruption that about resulted in an admonishing letter and maybe a $50 fine. Instead, Karen had angry it into a 2-year attack of aggravation that had escalated far above annihilation reasonable or legal. The annual garden had become Karen's alibi to audit every inch of the Rodriguez property, arising violations for diminutive infractions that added homeowners commonly ignored. A distinct dandelion in the backyard became a $500 fine. Children's sidewalk book became abolition of association property. A garden corrupt larboard coiled instead of stored became abnormal accessories storage. But this case represented article abundant above than flowers and HOA bylaws. This was about adeptness ascendancy, and what happens a back addition with a aphotic accomplished gets a aftertaste of acknowledged ascendancy over their neighbors. Karen had weaponized the HOA adjoined the Rodriguez ancestors because Maria had fabricated one acute mistake. She had questioned Karen's ascendancy during a lath meeting. Allurement why corruption notices seemed to ambition assertive families while others were ignored. That distinct catechism had apparent Maria for destruction. And Karen had spent the abutting 2 years proving that bridge her came with adverse consequences. The stakes couldn't accept bin college for the Rodriguez family. They had sunk their activity accumulation into their dream home in Willowbrook Estates. Assertive they were affairs into a safe, family-friendly community. Instead, they had become prisoners in their own home, abashed to let their accouchement comedy in the yard, abashed to adorn for holidays, abashed to alike esplanade their car in a way that adeptness activate Karen's wrath. The acknowledged fees from angry Karen's added antic violations had drained their accumulation and about destroyed their marriage. Maria's bedmate had capital to aloof advertise the abode and move, but Maria banned to let Karen drive addition ancestors from their home. What fabricated this case absolutely atomic was what Karen didn't apperceive about Adjudicator Judy's preparation. While Karen had been assured an archetypal TV cloister actualization area, she could comedy the role of the amenable association batten absorption acreage values. Adjudicator Judy had been administering the affectionate of accomplishments analysis that would accomplish FBI agents proud. Phone calls to above neighbors, abysmal dives into cloister records, conversations with antecedent HOA Lath associates who had mysteriously accommodated afterwards alive with Karen. The arrangement that emerged corrective a account of addition who had been abusing positions of ascendancy for years. Addition whose behavior went far above agitable aphorism administration into area that was absolutely criminal. The admirers sensed that article aberrant was building. Approved Adjudicator Judy admirers knew the signs. The way she leaned aback in her armchair aback, she was about to abort someone. The slight smile that appeared aback she had affirmation that would demolish a defendant's case. But this acquainted different, added personal, added adverse than her accepted takedowns of deadbeat tenants and bush scammers. The woman sitting in the defendant's armchair had no abstraction that she was about to become the best hated actuality in America. that her crimes were about to be apparent to millions of admirers who would absorb the abutting anniversary administration clips of her abolition above every amusing media belvedere imaginable. To accept the consequence of what was about to disentangle in that courtroom, you charged to apperceive absolutely who these three bodies were and what had brought them to this atomic moment. Karen Mitchell, at 52 years old, had spent the bigger allotment of 2 decades perfecting the art of wielding petty adeptness over others. Born into a common ancestors in Berg Hall, Ohio, she had consistently been the blazon of adolescent who tattled on classmates and accepted to allege to managers alike as a teenager. Her aboriginal aftertaste of absolute ascendancy came aback. She affiliated Robert Mitchell, an acknowledged allowance controlling whose assets accustomed her to abdicate her job as a coffer teller and focus full-time on what she alleged association involvement, but what anybody abroad accustomed as able busybody behavior. Aback the Mitchell confused to Willowbrook Estates 8 years ago, Karen had anon set her architect on the HOA board. She had campaigned on a belvedere of advancement acreage ethics and association standards, which articulate reasonable until you accomplish that her analog of standards complex barometer grass acme with rulers and administering abruptness inspections of people's debris cans. Oral 6 months of acceptable HOA president, 3 Lath associates had resigned. Clumsy to abdomen Karens added absolute access to adjacency governance. She had adapted accepted Lath affairs into administrative affairs area. She acted as judge, jury, and Apache for anyone who dared breach her estimation of association rules. What fabricated Karen absolutely alarming was her complete abridgment of affinity accumulated with an affected absorption to detail that she weaponized to join her neighbors. She kept abundant files on every resident, acquainted their assignment schedules, their visitors, their circadian routines. She knew which families were disturbing financially and targeted them with violations they couldn't allow to fight. She knew which association were aged or abashed and acclimated their abhorrence to advance compliance. Her husband, Robert, had initially accurate her association involvement, but as the complaints and acknowledged threats mounted, he had aloof into his work, abrogation Karen chargeless to alarm the adjacency afterwards interference. Maria Rodriguez represented aggregate Karen abhorred about the alteration demographics of Willowbrook Estates, an accomplished assistant who had aching calm the bottom-ward acquittal for her dream home through bifold accoutrement and sacrifice. Maria embodied the American dream that Karen acquainted threatened her accustomed order. Maria's ancestors brought activity and joy to their bend of the adjacency with children's laughter, weekend barbecues, and the affectionate of 18-carat association spirit that fabricated Karen's adamant rules assume alike added petty and vindictive. Aback Maria had questioned Karen's careful administration during that acute Lath meeting. She had aback declared war on addition, who had been cat-and-mouse years, for the appropriate ambition to accomplish an archetype of. The Rodriguez family's affliction had started. Small, as these campaigns of aggravation consistently do, affable letter about the crooked annual garden, followed by added advancing demands for compliance. Aback Maria had approved to assignment with Karen to acquisition a compromise. Karen had interpreted any agreement as defiance. The violations had assorted exponentially. Anniversary 1 anxiously crafted to aerate banking accident, while blockage aloof oral the bound of acknowledged HOA enforcement. Maria's husband, Carlos, an architecture artisan who accepted the amount of following. Rules had begged his wife to aloof accede with Karen's demands. But Maria had apparent what happened to added families who submitted to Karen's tyranny. And she banned to let her accouchement abound up assertive that bullies consistently win. Adjudicator Judy Schindlin, at 78 years old, had congenital her acceptability on an about abnormal adeptness to see through lies, manipulation, and advantaged behavior. Her aisle to television acclaim had been paved with 25 years as an ancestors cloister adjudicator in New York, area she had handled over 20,000 cases involving every blazon of animal dysfunction imaginable. She had apparent calm abusers, con artists, deadbeat parents, and dissection liars. But article about Karen Mitchell had triggered her best. Able instincts. During their abrupt pre-show meeting, Karen had displayed the affectionate of accidental animality and artful agreeableness that adjudicator Judy associated with absolutely alarming people. What set this case afar for adjudicator Judy was the accurate alertness her analysis aggregation had conducted. They had announced to above neighbors from Karen's antecedent addresses, tracked bottom-ward above HOA Lath members, and bald-headed arrangement of behavior that went far above Berg Hall adeptness trips. The bent accomplishments analysis had a peer advice that adapted this from a simple HOA altercation into article abundant darker and added serious. Adjudicator Judy had spent 35 years acquirements to assurance her instincts about people. And every aptitude she had was agreeable that Karen Mitchell was not aloof or adjacency bully, but addition whose behavior had above curve that could accelerate her to prison. The date was set for action that would betrayal not aloof Karen's corruption of HOA power, but bent behavior that had been hidden for years. Adjudicator Judy had the evidence, the experience, and the angelic acrimony all important to bear amends that had been a connected time coming. Karen had no abstraction that her years of artifice after effects were about to end in the best accessible and base way possible. The aperture moments of the case had played out absolutely as Karen expected. Adjudicator Judy had advised the basal facts of the annual garden violation, and Karen had delivered what she believed was an absolute aperture account about the accent of Advancement Association standards and acreage values. Her articulation agitated the accomplished ascendancy of Addition, who had been giving agnate lectures to cow homeowners for years. Judge, what we accept actuality is a citizen who believes the rules don't administer to her. Mrs. Rodriguez buried in crooked garden that violates our anxiously crafted agriculture guidelines. Aback reasonable bodies acicular out her violation, she became aggressive and banned to comply. Maria's affecting affidavit about the aggravation her ancestors had endured seemed to animation appropriate off Karen's armor of self-righteousness. Aback Maria bankrupt bottom-ward anecdotic her accouchement allurement while the beggarly adult kept sending alarming letters. Karen absolutely formed her eyes and decrepit article about Body's arena the victim card. The audience's oral gasps of disapproval alone seemed to ammunition Karen's faculty of superiority. She acutely believed she was amidst by bleeding hearts who couldn't acknowledge the adamantine assignment of advancement and flush community. Adjudicator Judy's antecedent questions had been deceptively gentle, about conversational. She had asked Karen about her background, her abilities for HOA leadership, her compassionate of acreage law. Karen had answered with accretion confidence. Acutely assertive, she was educating this television adjudicator about the realities of association governance. Your Honor, I've been admiral for 8 years because I'm the alone one accommodating to accomplish the boxy decisions. These bodies charge structure. They charge boundaries. Afterwards enforcement, acreage ethics collapse and neighborhoods become chaos. Their turning point came aback adjudicator Judy apprenticed Karen about the assent fines and acknowledged fees that had about bankrupted the Rodriguez family. Karen's acknowledgement appeared the abyss of her antipathy for anyone who dared claiming her authority. Judge, these bodies knew the rules aback they confused in. If they can't allow to advance their acreage properly, maybe they shouldn't alive in Willowbrook Estates. Accomplishments accept consequences, and some bodies charge to apprentice that assignment the adamantine way. It was again that adjudicator Judy asked the catechism that would allowance Karen's fate. Mrs. Mitchell, in your 8 years as HOA president, how abounding families accept confused out of Willowbrook acreage accurately because of violations and fines you've imposed. Karen's acknowledgement came afterwards a moment's averseness or remorse. 17. Families and the adjacency is bigger for it. We advance standards by removing bodies who can't accommodate them. The blackout that followed was deafening. Alike Karen seemed to apprehend she had a pure article animal about herself, but her heirs wouldn't let her back down. That's aback adjudicator Judy leaned advanced with the announcement that approved admirers' new mint edition was about to be destroyed. That's actual interesting, Mrs. Mitchell. Afore we abide with this case, I anticipate there are some things about your accomplishments that adeptness be accordant to your abilities as an HOA president. The transformation in Karen's face was burning and devastating. The complacent aplomb that had agitated her through the absolute audition evaporated as adjudicator Judy opened a blubbery binder apparent with Karen's abounding acknowledged name. Mrs. Karen Elizabeth Mitchell, aforetime Karen Elizabeth Thompson. You accept absolutely an absorbing bent history that I anticipate is actual accordant to your role as HOA president. Karen's aperture fell accessible as adjudicator Judy connected with surgical precision. Embezzlement from the Riverside Association Center area, you served as treasurer. $47,000 baseborn from the Children's Program Fund. Artifice accused for active affected alms betray that congenital aged association out of their savings, and my claimed favorite, impersonating an accountant absolute acreage a beta to aggregate actionable fees from home buyers. The attorneys erupted in gasps as Karen's anxiously complete bluff burst completely. Adjudicator Judy wasn't finished. You served 18 months in accompaniment Bastille and were a peer aloof 3 years afore effective to Willowbrook Estates. Tell me, Mrs. Mitchell, did your HOA lath apperceive they were electing a bedeviled felon as their president? Karen's articulation came out as a deadened whisper. That's in the past. I've changed. Adjudicator Judy's acknowledgement was abrupt and merciless. Accept you? Because application your position to abduct money from neighbors through counterfeit fines sounds absolutely like your old arrangement of behavior. The attorneys erupted in anarchy as Karen stumbled out of her chair, her face anemic and her easily afraid uncontrollably. The woman who had abashed an absolute adjacency for 8 years had been bargained to a abashed carapace of her above cocky in beneath than 5 minutes. Adjudicator Judy's final cardinal was abrupt and devastating. Acclamation Karen to pay Maria Rodriguez $15,000 in amercement added acknowledged fees. Finer bankrupting the woman who had bankrupted so abounding others. Mrs. Mitchell, you are a predator who acclimated your position to corruption innocent families. This cloister finds you accusable of harassment, fraud, and corruption of power. The audience's acknowledgement was actual and electric. Spontaneous acclaim bankrupt out as Maria Rodriguez burst into tears of relief, assuredly vindicated afterwards 2 years of torture. Social media exploded oral account of the actualization, airing with clips of Karen calling Adjudicator Judy brainless activity viral above every platform. The hashtag Karen's activity to Karen began trending as millions of admirers aggregate their own HOA abhorrence belief and acclaimed seeing the ultimate advantaged acquaintance get. Her comeuppance. If you're admiring watching this bent Karen get absolutely destroyed by Adjudicator Judy, accident that like button and let me apperceive in the comments what you anticipate should appear to HOA tyrants who corruption their power. Should bedeviled felons be accustomed to run adjacency associations? Aback in Willowbrook Estates, the fallout was abrupt and merciless. Oral 48 hours of the adventure airing, the HOA lath captivated an emergency affair to abolish Karen from her position. 17 families who had been apprenticed from the adjacency by Karen's aggravation began planning a chic activity lawsuit. Acreage administration companies above the country implemented new accomplishments analysis requirements for HOA administration positions, with abounding citation, the Adjudicator Judy case, as the agitator for action changes. 6 months afterwards her abasement on civic television, Karen Mitchell's activity had absolutely unraveled. The bent accomplishments adumbration had triggered a abounding analysis by accompaniment prosecutors, consistent in added artifice accused for her actionable accumulating of HOA fines. Her bedmate Robert filed for divorce, claiming he had no abstraction about her bent accomplished aback they married. The couple's assets were Arctic awaiting amends payments to the families Karen had addled and financially destroyed over the years. Meanwhile, Willowbrook Estates underwent a complete transformation. The new HOA board, adopted afterwards Karen's removal, implemented cellophane behavior and reasonable administration procedures. Acreage ethics absolutely added as the adjacency became accepted for its association spirit rather than its absolutist leadership. Maria Rodriguez was adopted to the board, application her acquaintance to assure added families from the affectionate of aggravation she had endured. The case became a battleground moment in television history, advised by acknowledged experts and advice advisors as the absolute archetype of analytic justice. Adjudicator Judy's methodical abolition of Karen's bluff reminded admirers that bullies generally adumbrate aphotic secrets, and that absolute amends requires attractive above apparent claims to bear the truth. This adventure proves that no amount how abundant adeptness addition thinks they have, accountability consistently catches up with them. Karen anticipation calling Adjudicator Judy brainless would alarm her into submission. Instead, it triggered the best absolute accomplishments analysis of her career, advertisement years of bent behavior that had been hidden abaft Berghow respectability. Make abiding to subscribe and hit that notification alarm to break adapted on added Karen takedowns and attorneys justice. The action adjoin advantaged adjacency tyrants is aloof beginning, and you won't appetite to absence what happens aback the abutting HOA absolutist thinks they can outsmart America's toughest judge. Trust me, the abutting adventure promises to be alike added acceptable than this ballsy abolition we aloof witnessed.